Okay, so let's dive right in. Today we're taking a look at the biggest global news stories from November 6, 2024. Buckle up because it's a wild ride.
It really is. We've got everything from U.S. election results that, well, nobody saw coming to international tensions that seem to be going from bad to worse.
Definitely a lot to unpack. So why don't we start with that election shocker? Donald Trump defeating Kamala Harris to return to the White House.
It is a historic win. A second non-consecutive term is incredibly rare in U.S. history.
Exactly. So what does this mean? What could a Trump second term look like, especially on the global stage?
Well, I think we can look back at his first term for some clues. Remember America First?
Oh yeah, I think everyone remembers that.
That approach really shook things up in terms of trade deals and relationships with allies, not to mention his stance on things like climate change.
And all of that had a huge impact on the global political landscape.
Absolutely. So we might see a return to those policies, which could mean some major shifts in how the U.S. interacts with countries like China and Russia.
And how those countries react in return.
Exactly. There's also that proposed policy on fluoride in drinking water.
Right. Trump and RFK Jr. teaming up on that one.
Wow.
It's definitely gotten people talking.
It has. It's a complex issue with strong arguments on both sides.
Yeah, for sure. Adding fluoride to water is supposed to help prevent tooth decay, right?
Yeah, especially in areas where people might not have easy access to dental care. Supporters say it's a safe and effective way to improve public health, but those opposed to it.
They worry about the potential long-term health effects.
Exactly. They see it as government overreach. So removing fluoride nationwide would be a massive shift, potentially sparking some really heated debates.
Okay, well, let's move on from U.S. politics to a region that's constantly making headlines, the Middle East. And the situation there seems to be getting even more complicated.
It really does.
Protests have broken out in Tel Aviv after Prime Minister Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant.
Yeah, that was a pretty dramatic move.
It was. So what was behind that decision?
Well, it all comes down to Netanyahu's proposed judicial reforms. They've been incredibly controversial in Israel, and Gallant publicly came out against them. So many people see his dismissal as Netanyahu consolidating his power and pushing ahead with those reforms no matter what.
Which could make things even more tense within Israel.
Absolutely. And it could also have ripple effects on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Definitely not a situation that needs any more fuel added to the fire.
You got that right.
And to make matters worse, Israeli forces just captured a high-ranking Hezbollah operative in Lebanon.
That's a huge escalation. You're talking about a direct strike against Hezbollah, which has very close ties to Iran.
So it wouldn't be surprising to see some kind of retaliation from Hezbollah.
Not at all. That could easily draw both Israel and Lebanon deeper into the conflict. It just goes to show how quickly things can spiral out of control in that region.
Absolutely. And speaking of volatile situations, North Korea is back at it with another ballistic missile test.
Yeah, those nuclear ambitions are always a cause for concern.
Definitely. And the U.S. is now accusing Russia and China of shielding North Korea from any real consequences for these actions.
It's a classic geopolitical power play.
It is. So what's the bigger picture here? What are the implications of these accusations?
Well, it points to a growing alliance between Russia, China, and North Korea, which directly challenges the U.S. and its allies.
So we're talking about a potential shift in the global balance of power.
Potentially, yes. And it gets even more complicated when you consider what's happening in Ukraine.
Right, with reports of Ukrainian forces firing on North Korean troops who were allegedly helping Russia in that conflict.
Exactly. It's a prime example of how a regional conflict can quickly become a global one, with unexpected players getting involved.
And just to make things even more interesting, Iran has issued threats of a crushing response against Israel and the U.S.
Iran is feeling increasingly isolated and threatened, especially with all the escalating tensions in the region.
So they're trying to project strength, basically saying, don't mess with us.
That's a pretty good summary. But the problem is, the more everyone throws around threats and shows of force, the greater the risk of a serious miscalculation. And in a region that's already a powder keg, that's a scary thought.
Definitely. Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about human rights.
Okay.
Sadly, we have more bad news coming out of Iran.
What's happening now?
A young woman was arrested for protesting on a university campus. Amnesty International is now calling for her release.
It's tragic, but not surprising, unfortunately.
I mean, how many times have we seen this kind of crackdown on dissent in Iran, especially when it comes to women speaking out?
It's an ongoing issue. The Iranian regime is incredibly restrictive when it comes to freedom of expression, and women who challenge the status quo often face the harshest consequences.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. But it's also important to highlight the incredible courage of those who continue to fight for basic freedoms in Iran. They deserve all the international support we can give them.
Absolutely. And speaking of women facing oppression, the situation in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate under Taliban rule.
Unfortunately, yes.
Now, they've banned women from praying aloud.
It's a devastating blow to Afghan women. I mean, can you imagine being denied the basic right to express your faith?
It's appalling.
It really is. And it's a clear sign that the Taliban has no intention of upholding basic human rights. This ban further isolates women from public life, limiting their opportunities for education, work, and even spiritual expression. It's a tragic setback for a country that's already been through so much.
It really is. Okay, well, let's turn our attention to a few other notable events from around the world. In India, a tragic bus crash has claimed over 35 lives.
Yeah, that's a stark reminder of the importance of road safety, especially in developing countries.
It's a terrible loss of life. And it highlights the need for investment in infrastructure and safety regulations to prevent these kinds of accidents from happening.
Absolutely. Development can't just be about economic growth. It has to include ensuring the safety and well-being of citizens.
Exactly. Meanwhile, in Europe, Spain is dealing with the aftermath of deadly floods, and protests have broken out.
Oh, wow. What sparked those protests?
Well, the floods have revealed a lot of anger towards the Spanish royal family. People are criticizing them for being out of touch and insensitive to the suffering caused by the floods.
They see the royal family living this lavish lifestyle while people are struggling to rebuild their lives.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even long-standing institutions like monarchies need to adapt and respond to the needs of the people they represent.
That's a good point.
And finally, Canada has decided to reduce the number of refugees they're accepting due to a housing crisis.
It's a tough situation. On the one hand, you have a responsibility to care for your own citizens, but on the other hand, there's a moral obligation to provide refuge to those fleeing persecution.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really is. Every country has to find a balance between meeting domestic needs and upholding humanitarian principles. And sometimes that means making difficult choices.
Okay, so before we wrap up, we can't forget about U.S. elections.
Oh, absolutely.
With Trump back in the White House, things are bound to get even more interesting. What are you keeping an eye on?
Well, the political divide in the U.S. is deeper than ever, so I think we can expect a lot of heated debates on key issues like the economy, healthcare, and climate change.
Yeah, for sure. The outcome of these elections will have a huge impact not just on the U.S., but on the entire world.
Definitely. It's a reminder that we're all interconnected, and what happens in one country can have ripple effects across the globe.
That's a great point to end on. So, to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this whirlwind tour of global news. We covered a lot of ground today, from political shakeups to humanitarian crises, and it's clear that we live in a complex and rapidly changing world.
It's more important than ever to stay informed, engage with these issues, and consider multiple perspectives. Don't just take things at face value.
Right. Do your own research, form your own opinions. And as you continue to follow these stories, think about which one resonated with you the most. What sparked your curiosity? And what aspects do you want to explore further? The world is full of fascinating and challenging events, so stay curious, stay informed, and keep digging deeper. Until next time.